Hello and welcome to the National College Podcast, where we explore key trends, policy updates and best practices shaping education today. I'm your host, Sophie Campbell-Ford, and in this episode, we're diving into the future of exams, specifically the plans for GCSEs and A-levels to have a digital option by 2030. Joining me today is Simon Burns, Head of Chemistry and Associate Assistant Head Teacher at Watford Grammar School for Girls. With first-hand experience in digital assessment trials, Simon brings valuable insights into the opportunities and challenges schools face in this transition. Simon, thank you so much for being here today. It is great to have you with us. So let's dive straight in to start with. Can you give us your thoughts on the plan for GCSEs and A-levels to have a digital option by 2030? Why do you think exam boards are proposing this shift?
Yeah, so I think that they have looked at this in detail and they've done quite a lot of kind of in the field research and asking quite a lot of schools and students what they think of it. There's a multi kind of pronged attack, I suppose, to it. This is the way they will be working in the future. This is the way the world is currently moving. Everything's moving more digitally, and so why are we still assessing in a fairly archaic fashion? Another is that it's more sustainable. It's better for the environment. Think about the volumes of paper being used. And also there are, I think, correct claims that digital assessments have the ability to be a bit more accessible for everybody and level a bit of a playing field for students with diverse learning needs and for those students who have current access arrangements. It could all be sorted for them, not entirely everything, but a levelling playing field. And I think I read that there was, in 2019, I think it was, about 10,000 scripts that were online, so typed up essays, things like that, for Pearson EdXL, which went to 90,000 last year, with something like 23,000 coming in GCSE history alone. There's obviously a shift of students requiring laptops, requiring devices to do this, so there is a fairly natural push in that direction anyway. So I can see all of those reasons, and I do believe in all those reasons. It's just there's huge logistical problems and barriers in between actually making it there. But I think that's really where they're coming from.
Yeah, it'll be really interesting to talk about those barriers and challenges as we go into this chat. Before we start on those, I just want to focus a little bit on the digital assessment trials that are already underway in some schools. According to reports, these trials have shown mixed feedback from students and educators. How do you think these trials have helped shape the conversation so far, and what lessons can we learn from them?
Yeah, I think there's been positives and negatives. I think if I go back to the point I was just making about levelling a playing field, there's quite a lot of adaptability you can have on these online or on screen or digital assessments, depending on whoever's using that phrase, will churn a different one out. But it's changing the colour of the screen, being able to zoom in and out. There's claims that it makes it easier if people want to copy and paste parts of an essay they're writing, and it's just made a lot easier for the students to do the work they want to do. I think there have been barriers in the kind of functionality of it and the not really knowing how it's looking and being able to prepare your students for what it actually feels like to do this. And there's a big difference between, I think, people thinking that students nowadays are very digitally literate, but does that translate into sitting for an hour typing? There's an argument for and against that, but it's, yes, people are very digitally literate, but how can we do it? I know certainly for computer science, it's been a real win, because everyone that I've read has been saying actually it's brilliant to be able to sort of live code, to write their code, to test it, to rewrite it, to test it, which is much better than a paper-based format for that subject, of course. I think one of the biggest things for me trying to implement this in my school and trying to learn a bit about it is the trials that have been going on. There's not been a massive amount of public discussion over it. There seems to be lots of snippets, but not big public, right, every other school have all of this information, this is really what we've learned. I think that's one of the biggest barriers for me at the moment, is there's not a huge amount coming out of it. You have to really dig to try and find something.
Yeah, and as you said, there isn't a lot of discussion around it, and it sounds like a lot of it's just coming from the exam boards. That's
Yes.
where we heard about it. And so the exam boards have been relatively vocal about the need for this transition, and they have cited benefits, like you said, accessibility, efficiency, and relevance in a digital world. In your view, though, what are the key motivations driving exam boards towards this change?
Um, I think it is that. I think for them, they probably are looking for a more sustainable model to their working practice, because I cannot imagine the volume of paper that churns through the country in May and June
Yeah.
every year. I think it's also for them quite a big coup to be the first ones. OCR are certainly chiming out that they're the first ones to do a fully digital computer science GCSE in England. I think it's the kind of kudos of being the first ones and say, because it's a competitive market and people have free choice. And if they believe that there is a drive in schools and in parents and in students to go this way for the preparing them for their future and things like that, they will want to be the first to do it. And I do think it's fairly open in terms of actually these are the other benefits and we do believe in those. And I believe when I read and listen to people, I do believe that those are their true values and they're important things. But yeah, I think there's a big drive to be the first to do something for sure.
Definitely. And looking at schools in terms of whether they're ready for this, a survey found that only 60% of schools in the UK feel confident about implementing digital exams by 2030,
Yeah.
with concerns around infrastructure and training being the main issues. We've also heard from Ofqual's chief regulator about his concern, stating that the plan should be treated with extreme caution due to what I understand being the disparity between the infrastructure between schools. And what do you see as the biggest barriers for schools today?
Yeah, I mean, if I think to answer that fully, I think we have to have a little look at the proposed timeline because that kind of puts into perspective why this is such a big barrier. Because we're sat here in 2025, which was meant to be where a mock was available for GCSE reading and listening for Italian and Polish for Pearson EdXL. They've pushed that back by a year, but because of the election and uncertainty and change of government and how it's going to play out, that was meant to be this year. So they've said that they'll push that back by a year. It was also meant to be available for GCSE English and Pearson's English 2.0 course to have the option to sit in the next couple of years like that. AQA have also said that they wanted to have a major subject, whatever that might translate to. I think a lot of people think English is what they're referring to, but they've not said, but a major subject to have a digital aspect by 2030. A lot of international GCSEs and A-levels are due to be moving in that way. So in the next 5 years, there's quite a lot meant to be rolling out. And whilst GCSE Italian and Polish have quite small cohorts, I think I saw it has an average of 4 in in a cohort. It's still meant to be happening next year, which is a big shift in how schools are set up. And I think it's important to see the timeline ahead of us and thinking, again, AQA have said by 2030 a major subject. What is that subject? How does it look? 2030 is not that far away, realistically. If you're thinking about GCSEs for 2030, that's the year 7, 8s at the moment in secondary schools. So they're currently sitting in their secondary schools where they'll be sitting exams proposed to have some digital aspect. So it's actually live. It's happening to these people in the next few years. And I think that's where we then get a bit of context on why this is such a big barrier. Because if you're thinking about a big cohort, a lot of schools have cohorts of their year 11 cohorts are 180, 210. There are schools that are in the 300s. There aren't many schools that have the infrastructure to have. I mean, my school certainly does not have. We have 210 students in a year group. we don't have 210 spare laptops sitting in a cupboard waiting for the moment to wheel them out in May. We also don't have the Wi-Fi capabilities to make sure it's robust enough. We can obviously have the school on their devices, but robust enough to know that an actual GCSE is going to go through for 2 hours without a hiccup. We would need to test that. And what happens if a laptop dies? Sports halls around the country don't often have lots of electrical cabling going right down the middle of it. What's going to happen with there? And I think it's all those unknowns. And as we said, there's been trials happening, and there have been international GCSEs and international A-levels that have had this. How did they come across these problems? How did they solve them? But knowing the time frame of it is quite scary in a way, because you think, actually, these are students that, as a teacher, I will see in the corridors.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, are we ready for that as a school, for this whole cohort of students to be doing this? I would challenge a lot of schools to say yes. And whilst, if you look at all the information from the exam boards and how they're projecting, this is why we're doing it, and they wheel out a lot of statistics about X% of students have said this is how they want to do it, and this, that, and the other. And then you come to actually pragmatics of it and logistics of it. That's why a lot of schools are saying, I don't think we're ready. Like, I just don't think we're prepared for it. And in the current financial climate as well, what school is going to be buying lots and lots of devices that are reliable enough to work for a morning session, afternoon session, next day, off we go again? And that's assuming that every exam is digital, of course, which it won't be. But we've got to cater for that, haven't we? So I think if you look at the timescale, that's where it starts to get a bit dicey, and I think that's where people get worried, because when you start thinking about it more, there's a lot there. On the surface, it's a brilliant idea, and I am all for it. I think the benefits far outweigh any kind of negative thoughts. But if we're going to do it, we've got to do it right. And if you look at the proposed timescales, it's very tight. It's very tight. And schools are big beasts. It takes a lot to shift a way of working.
That is such a good point. Yeah, and what you've said earlier as well about one of the benefits of digital exams is their potential to support students with additional needs, with features such as text-to-speech, adjustable font sizes, and other tools, zooming in and out, for example. How significant do you think this is, and how can schools make sure that these tools are effectively implemented?
So I think this is probably the biggest drive for this, in my opinion. I think alongside the environmentally sustainable approach, I think the ability to have an assessment that meets the needs of a lot of learners, I think, can only be a positive thing. If there are a huge range of access arrangements that students currently are able to have, or are on option for different types of different learning needs. A lot of them won't be met by this, because if someone needs extra time, they need extra time. But some of them will be. And if you think about also then logistics of a school running, it will make their lives a lot easier as well, with the way that they bring an assessment together. So I'm thinking things like students might need a reader. Well, actually, if you've got text to audio, you just need headphones. That's all you'll need. And those students could be sitting their assessment in the same venue rather than a separate venue with a separate invigilator. And school space is at a premium at the moment anyway. That's brilliant. And they can have questions reread to them as many times as they want without having to feel like they have to ask someone they potentially don't know either, which for students with high anxiety, that can be quite difficult to say, could you read that for a fourth time for me? They might just feel embarrassed and they don't want to do it. And so to just be able to re-highlight or click again or something, and it just comes through their headphones, that's brilliant. For students who might require it in a larger font, and therefore you have to request it from the exam board or do a bit of photocopying, they can just zoom in. But that's for everybody as well. If somebody else just wants to see something enlarged, they can very easily. Or if they have a certain colour overlay, they don't need that. And there's been a couple of things on some of the exam board websites where you can play about and have a look at what these proposals might look like. And there is an example where you can change the background colour and you can change the font colour, and it's very, very easy and very simple, but very effective. And so, again, students can have their access arrangements without feeling like they're someone special going off to a different room when the rest of their peers are sitting in the hall, or they're having to be sidelined at the register because they've got something else they need to go on. It's actually, no, we can go as part of everybody, and you can just have your requirement as you need it. I think that's really, really powerful, and actually could be quite a game changer for just making these assessments more accessible for everybody, including those who need it. I think that's one of the biggest benefits.
Definitely. I think inclusion is a huge aspect of what we're looking at moving forward, and it's what Ofsted have come out with as well, with their focus on inclusion. And as you say, this could be a big step into achieving that level of inclusion that we're looking for.
Yes.
One of the other areas that we're really keen to talk about is digital literacy.
Yeah.
And it's very much increasingly important in today's workforce, and very much assumed, I think, that youngsters are digitally literate. They've got the digital skills required for this, which I think we all know is actually not as accurate as we think. But by introducing digital exams, we could encourage students to develop these skills, which could be more aligned with modern workplace expectations. Do you think this is a strong argument for the transition? How might it influence the way that schools teach and assess students in the long term?
I think, like I said, I think there are three major benefits. One is the inclusion accessibility, which for me is the top one. Then comes the sustainability aspect. For me, I think this is the bottom of the ladder. There's digital literacy and there's digital literacy. There's digital literacy in the way that a teenager can run rings around someone like me on their device and will be able to do things that I just won't be able to follow. But do they have the digital literacy to do what is needed to sit an assessment is a totally different question, and we've said that earlier. It's whether or not these assessments match what is actually happening in the real world in terms of what someone like you might be doing in the office. If it doesn't, then that argument falls down because it's not teaching them that at all. And from a school's perspective, it doesn't really matter so much what the real world is doing, because a school will prepare a student as best they can for their assessment at the end of the day. Schools aren't exam factories, but that's the game we're in. And so schools will have to adapt what they do because we're very used to teaching them exam technique and how to approach a problem, how to approach a question, and what kind of terminology to use and things like that. We will have to adapt to, right, we need to get you ready to be able to sit this style of assessment. For me, I'm not sure, like I say, that's the biggest benefit of it. It's a good thing to put on a poster. It's in practice, it's not the major thing, but it will cause a big shift in how schools approach assessments and how schools have to approach their assessments in order to prepare their students for that part of their school journey. Yeah.
And so going back to then what your top three are, the third
Yeah.
one, which we haven't quite spoken about yet, is sustainability.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about that. How significant do you think this environmental angle is in terms of reducing paper usage and associated costs?
Yeah.
And does it outweigh the financial investment required for implementation?
Yeah, I think it does. There's some research from AQA a couple of years ago that said that for every paper sat, there would be a 9% reduction in carbon emissions, which is pretty big, to be fair. And I can't quite, it's such a big image in my head that I can't quite formulate it. But if you imagine the volume of paper that moves across the country in May and June is insane. I can't quite wrap my head around it. I mean, even when I take a class test in, I think that's huge. It's massive. But of course, the story of the test is it's been printed on paper. It's then been transferred across the country in all different schools, in all different directions. It's then sat by a student, an invigilator says, pens down. It then gets transported again across the country. It then gets scanned, and then it sits on an examiner's laptop, for example, depending on what assessment it is and how it's being marked. If it just happened to all remain digital, you cut out a lot of that. And I think that has a huge, huge impact. And there will be a massive financial implication in making sure this works, making sure it's secure, making sure that it's all robust, and just the kind of skill set that's needed to transfer all of this from our traditional pen and paper to on screen. There's a massive cost to that. But if their calculations are correct, a 9% reduction in carbon emissions, given that we're currently sitting where we are with the climate crisis and everything else, it seems silly not to. There doesn't seem to be a massive argument in the other way. If we think about the bigger world picture, why aren't we, would be the major question I would pose.
There's possibly a short-term versus long-term discussion
Yes.
here. What's the cost in the short term versus the benefit in the long term?
Yeah, and we'll come back to that point, I think, in a bit if we talk about what I'm doing at my school, because it's certainly the case in workload. It's short-term versus long-term. But it is exactly right. Do you take the bit of a hit now, knowing that in 5 years' time we'll be reaping the benefits of it? I think another benefit that isn't really highlighted anywhere, I've seen it a couple of times, and people have said it a couple of times, and it's about the turnaround in assessments and the lag between a student sitting their exam to then getting their results is massive. It's absolutely massive. And there's always an argument, there's always a discussion, especially around UCAS applications and going off to university and whether or not you could apply with grades. And there's a debate around that and the benefits of applying with grades rather than with predictions and waiting for results day. If you're able to speed up the process by, I would argue, quite some considerable margin, and a couple of the examples have said that the process would be sped up, you might shift in a direction where actually you could have results a lot earlier and it could be done a lot quicker, and you're in a bit of a better position with things like that, and students moving on to their next steps and making potentially different decisions on their futures, knowing exactly what grades they've got rather than on predictions. It's a totally different discussion, but it's a potential benefit that comes out of this that I don't think many people are really talking about.
No, I've definitely not heard it or considered it. And you talking about it now, it can be such a slow process to have to then go resit, and like you say, it's preventing the students from taking that next step, which surely we want them to be doing. If it just comes down to a bad day examining, for example, then being held back from that, to be able to have an intervention sooner rather than later, support them to then get the grades that they require. It's a very interesting point, definitely. And then the final thing I just want to talk to before we talk about your work at your school are the practical challenges around infrastructure. Reliable internet, you've spoken about, device availability, not having that cupboard of 200 laptops ready to go.
I'd like to see it.
I would like to see the school that does have it, but for many schools it is a massive hurdle. So how do you feel that schools can prepare to address this kind of challenge, and what kind of support would be most crucial?
Yeah, I mean, the elephant in the room is money. It's funding. It's where part of it is, like we said, there's not a huge amount of kind of tangible ideas and evidence of what these are actually truly going to look like for a GCSE English exam, for example. I don't teach English. I feel a bit bad in saying English, but it's just the one that it keeps on cropping up. But until we know that, then we don't know what kind of device the students will need. Do they need a touchscreen? Do they need a mouse? Do they need a keyboard? With that then comes incessant clicking of mice in a
So we shuddered there, that noise.
yeah, or tapping away on
Yeah.
keyboards. Do you then need ear defenders?
Yeah.
Do you then need these? It's those sorts of questions where, well, we need to know that before 9:05 on Monday morning of the first exam season, because we can't have 200 people in a hall tapping away and everyone getting really frustrated that they can't focus and then hunting around for anyone who's got a spare pair of headphones. We can't have that. So it's then, so what device do they need? And therefore, does it need to be consistent across schools? Because the whole point of the exam season is that it is a level playing field for everybody across the country, whether or not they are sitting in Sheffield or Watford at 9 o'clock in the morning on Wednesday, the whatever of May. They are sitting the same paper at the same time. If one is sitting with a Apple Mac and one is sitting with a Acer, whatever, is that actually fair? There's a big